What's up, guys? It's your boy Yaniki. It is about time I got down to business and handled this video. If you can't tell by the thumbnail, courtesy of 8-Man Sid, who did that customized after the Volume 25 cover drop and told people to use it for anything. Today's video is about Tomura Shigaraki. It's officially Shiggy season. I promised you guys this video during NBA, and I'm not going to throw this away like I used to do in my old place with things. Instead, we put things where they go now, like an elf on a shelf. So, you got the manga volumes on hand, a couple extra in the box down here, got the chapters on the screen in case I want to pull up a reference in the middle of a rant, something just fell, and we're ready to go. So, one of the things that's important to note, if we're going to discuss Tomura Shigaraki, if we're going to discuss Tenko Shimura, we have to start not at the beginning chronologically of his existence, but rather to our introduction of him. Now, when we meet little Tomura, he's a big boy, and not necessarily in the sense that he's wiser, mature, strong, and all those other things, but rather he's an adult, a big boy. He shows up, makes a lot of gamer references, instantly kind of like, that's kind of catchy in a way. He obviously has his own personality flair. It's a good way to give us a reason to pay attention to him as a character. And in addition to that, his character design is one of the most detailed in the series, especially in the beginning, considering the number of hands drawn on him and in their various locations. Now, one of the things to note, though, is that if you took Shigaraki at his introduction, the majority of people found him to be wholly underwhelming. Now, for those of you who have already seen my rivalries video between Deku and Shigaraki and the way they parallel each other and everything coalesces into a point, incidentally, without them actually being involved with each other, unless the all for one is Deku's dad theory comes through, which I don't really support, but at the same time, if it ends up being that like Nana's descended from the first all one for all user, and that's kind of where I would see it going. If that's the case, it would be that Shigaraki is literally the descendant of the first one for all holders, and Deku would be the son of all for one. That's the only way I really see that going that way, even ignoring the fact that Shigaraki is already related to one of the one for all users as is. That being said, though, one of the things that I find a little interesting about Shigaraki, especially in the beginning, is that because he's so petulant, because he's childish, we instantly understand this is a dude who is not at all ready to be the main villain of the series. And of course, as the series goes on, and we see him, we instantly get a reality check when he fails at the USJ, and we see him get to safety, but everyone that he brought with him is captured essentially, minus Kurogiri. And part of the reason for this is that it was genuinely supposed to be a learning opportunity. We had seen Deku, bust up his body, succeed, and in a lot of ways we had seen him, though he was unprepared, take massive damage for taking those risks. However, unlike with Deku, who has, the school nurse and the safety nets of the superhero society as a whole, when he fails, he has someone to protect him, to nurture him, to bring him back to health, in addition to that, to look out for him. And while, yes, Shigaraki technically has the doctor and he technically has all for one who are in his corner around the time that this happens, it is not the same as having access to a healing quirk, and it is not the same as society being structured around keeping you elevated and encouraging you. Furthermore, the way in which the only way to stop Shigaraki is to enable his views that he expresses at the USJ attack, where he talks about how ultimately violence is a tool used by the government or other people who says so. And obviously All Might calls him out and says he's just, saying that to go with it. But the reality is those words were in his heart already. The thing is that on an intellectual level, he grasped those ideologies. On an emotional and a deeper level, as in actually having attachment and conviction dedicated towards those causes, that was non-existent at the time. And so, because at the end of the day, Shigaraki literally kind of viewed everything as like a game. Yes, there's the metaphors. Yes, there's the whole fact that we all speak a different language in the sense that we all have our interests and hobbies. The references that I make in my daily life to things, small things like this, would be, for some people completely irrelevant, whereas somebody from the My Hero fan could be like, oh yeah, I'm wearing a Ravenclaw hat right now. I don't know if, And the reality is like some of you guys might not have noticed that, or might have instantly recognized the giant blue bird, the gray coloring, and been like, "Oh, Ravenclaw house." The point is that Shigaraki is being built up like as a person who just happens to have a lot of like gaming interest that happens to be exploring villainy to a degree where it looks more like a hobby to him, and he's not taking it that seriously. So you kind of have someone who is seriously angry, seriously wants to destroy the world, but does not want to seriously approach the fundamental issue of how to gather the supporters and do everything correctly. Instead, he just kind of wants to show up, while out, have the best build, and go about his day. This sets him on a course to consistently get reality checked throughout the series. After taking his damage at the USJ, he watches the sports festival, makes notes, obviously, but we transition into him trying to recruit the serial killer, the hero killer, Stain. Now, Stain says he doesn't like Shigaraki and then decides that he does, partially for plot, partially because at the end of the day, Stain needed to see that he would be willing to stand up to him even in the face of death, but also in the fact that, like, because at the end of the day, they do need some conviction to do that. You need for someone to basically have you in a position where they can kill you and you to be like, dude, get off me, this ain't that. Like, what you want, not here. You don't want this. That takes the conviction necessary, and so like in that way he does impress him. But of course, Stain does also decide that he's going to kill Shigaraki once the Nomu are released. That never comes to fruition and is irrelevant due to the fact that he gets captured by 3 kids. Now, Shigaraki, though, what he takes away from that, though, is the thing that made people care about Stain so much is that it was terror with a reason, terror with intent. It was effectively actual terrorism, whereas what Shigaraki did in the same night was effectively just mass destruction. There was no agenda. The Nomu can't deliver a message. They can only be like a signal or a flare, but those particular grade of Nomu weren't going to show up, pull a high end, and be like, yo, dog, who's the strongest here? Let's box. Or they're not going to be the now officially a Nomu Kurogiri, who's like, hello, dapper fellows, I'm a Nomu. Shigaraki's the goat. I worship him. Blah, blah, blah. Like that. None of these things were going to be available at the time, so there was no way for Shigaraki to properly market himself, and so he ends up losing another valuable piece who has conviction, but in the process of losing that piece, gains the ability to gather followers. Now, when he gets those followers, when he starts cashing in on the Stain clout combined with the League of Villains terrorism group that is clearly the biggest thing on the town, which is kind of ironic when you think about the fact that by the time Stain came into their life and then left, the League of Villains was literally Shigaraki and Kurogiri. All for One and Uchiko are extended members, effectively. So Shigaraki was literally went from basically getting a bunch of recruits handed to him to actually having to start grinding once you get past the USJ event, because a lot of the local criminals or the easily accessed ones would have been locked up. I think there was about 67 people arrested at the USJ attack. So I think that's a good, depending on what city he's in, obviously, I think he's obviously like the bar is in Kamino or 5 kilometers from Kamino Ward where All Might and All for One fought. So his locality, his range was more of an industrial district or a working class one. So he probably pulled a lot of the local talent in that, or at least the base local talent within that first raid, which would have cost him a lot of members, which meant that like only things left now were valuable pieces though. And that's worth noting because those people decided, well, this group is strong, they're a faction that was capable of shaming Yue, I'll go join them. The Vanguard Action Squad is all the new recruits for the League of Villains. Every single one of them is in the Vanguard Action Squad, and that's handed over to Dabi, which it's still not fully explained why Dabi has been entrusted with the leadership role of the Vanguard Action Squad, but that's an entirely separate topic. But it's worth noting that I think Shigaraki acknowledged that with the danger of his quirk, the fact that he actually was a rational-minded person, arguably the most sane person that was there besides maybe Magne, Spinner being effectively an empty person who latches onto anything that he can isn't exactly the best grounds for what you're gonna like. That's not a leader's mentality. Spinner is objectively just a follower type of person. So in that regard, Shigaraki acknowledges, understands the hierarchical system, who's most intelligent, who's most reliable, what he needs to do to accommodate that person by giving Dabi like control of a specific Nomu. It lets Dabi know that he's acknowledged already. Shigaraki is getting better and better at understanding how to interact with people, now that he's done being a NEET that sits around playing video games all day and just studying with his master. So we fast forward even further, though, we get, the bringing of Bakugo. He decides to pick at the vulnerability. A lot of people thought that, or even call Bakugo Sasuke Part 2, which is inaccurate. I have an entire analysis, technically 2 different videos that kind of detail why Bakugo is not Sasuke. But the thing is that Shigaraki, in the process of targeting him, it lets us know that he's not just looking at gathering anybody to the cost of just anybody strong. He's also looking to pick at psychological vulnerabilities, things that could be exploited. It lets us know that Shigaraki, who does actually have a high intelligence, that for the gamer references and like the bratty nature that he has, that does not change the fact that he is effectively intelligent. One of the things that a lot of people expect is that intelligent characters don't have personality quirks. And in fact, I would say that intelligent people usually end up with more pronounced quirks because of some reason where that ends up like fitting into their life in a way that they just think is like so perfect. And so with Shigaraki, now, at this point in the story, it's very easy to assume that what Shigaraki's entire MO is purely manipulation. In fact, I would argue that while Shigaraki is definitely capable and probably did it, and I would say he definitively would have cared about Kurogiri back then, I don't know how much I could say he truly cared about the Vanguard Action Squad, even though he did tell Kurogiri that they were all valuable and he wanted each of them to come back. That being said, because of the incident at the training camp and the Kamina Award leading to the fall of All for One, this is one of the most important moments in the entire series, and one of the things that I think is worth noting is the way that the goodbye scene between Shigaraki and All for One is done, even in the manga or the anime, is made to be amped up to be taken very seriously and seen as like a genuine departure between a master and student that we as the audience are supposed to be invested in. Literally invested in their sensei-student relationship. And even the way All for One talks to All Might and says, "You failed as a teacher," etc. He takes pride in his relationship with Shigaraki, even if it is twisted and totally stems from the fact that he like generational familial cut All Might somehow. Like, I don't know what the term for I couldn't smash your master, so I did the next best thing, converted her grandson into a killing weapon against you, but I think that counts as villainy cucking. I don't know. Someone look it up. And with that whole dynamic, first off, Shigaraki, if he ever realizes that's what's going on, he's not gonna care. But I'm gonna get to that a little later because Shigaraki has plenty of reason on his own to dislike Hero Society, even without All for One tampering with him. So, which when we get to the backstory, I'll explain. So, from here on, All for One is out of the picture. Kurogiri soon leaves the picture too. And I think that's another thing that's worth noting, is that the same day that we see Shigaraki attain a massive victory during the overhaul arc is the same day we also see him take one of his biggest losses. And I think that is what really sets up the tone for what happens later in the series. But from the time that they lose All for One, they now have to hide out in the mountains. They're roughing it. They're low and they're trying to figure out different ways. And they're managing to maintain appearances for a little while by essentially making it so that, like, when they meet up with the Yakuza, they meet up in a dirty place. And Shigaraki's just like, oh, well, we can't take you to the main base yet, da-da-da-da-da. Even though we now know that, like, they were always hiding out on, like, abandoned warehouses and stuff after the incident with All for One getting captured, because that was their benefactor ultimately, and the rest of them ended up on the most wanted list even harder than they already were for characters like Twice, who was on the most wanted list way before he met Shigaraki or any of that. So Shigaraki goes from that to trying to build his own connections, infiltrate other networks. Overhaul approaches him. This is where things get intense, because after the Kamina loss, Shigaraki, at first glance, isn't that upset for real about losing Magne. But as you notice, there's certain things about that he says when he comes to compress his arm, plus the value of Magne in comparison to the foot soldier that Overhaul lost, to the fact that he made it a point to tell Twice and Toga that they would have to atone for the loss of Magne, but never gave them specific instructions to betray Overhaul, knowing that they would do that anyway, so that he didn't have to tell them. And it's important to note that we know that because of the fact that Nato interviews them and asks them directly, hey, did Shigaraki ask you to betray us? And they both say no. At the time, it's a small detail where they just both ask a question and they randomly blurt out answers. But in hindsight, it is established that they were literally under a truth-telling quirk and still managed to effectively come to the conclusion to betray them and do everything that Shigaraki would have needed them to do without Shigaraki giving them orders, which goes to show that, one, he has actual trust in Toga and Twice to not betray him, which means that's a relationship that he has to have trusted in having built up. Power of friendship. 2, he also is fully aware of their capabilities. 3, he understands them well enough that they understand him well enough already by the time that the Overhaul arc happens, that they can understand his intent even without him actually directly communicating it to them. So this goes to show us that already by this point, the League of Villains are actually starting to bond. They've actually started to create that familial vibe. Magne saying that this is their special place, or Twice saying that it wasn't just a one-way street for these characters. All of them are attached to each other on some level, with Dabi probably being the most attached, and with Twice definitively being the most, and Shigaraki being somewhere in the middle more than likely, genuinely caring about them, but also caring more about taking down Hero Society. To that same degree, though, when we get to the end of the Overhaul arc, where first off, we get the League of Villains using teamwork, and I think this is an important step because Shigaraki, for the most part, played it like a commander, just told people what to do, and then finally would go in when he thought it was vulnerable. During the Overhaul arc, when he attacks, he goes in first, taking point, which is effectively the most risky job, and enables his comrades to be able to back him up so that he can get to Overhaul later. But at the same time, it takes what is considered the highest probability success play, keeping Spinner as the driver to make sure that the person with the quirk least effective in this scenario is the person handling the vehicle, and everybody else is at the ready. Those good video games are coming in handy. Shigaraki's been playing them, taking all the strats he can from those RPGs and RTSs. So, and from there we get the speech. I hate you. You won't be able to lift a finger. One of the best Shigaraki moments, actually one of the best villain moments I've seen in a while, where we truly get to see a villain kind of cut loose on another one, and the sheer mockery of it all, the circumstances in which he leaves Overhaul on the side of the road, which we do get confirmation that Overhaul is still alive, and that his quirk altered after losing both hands somehow. The art that goes into that chapter, when he's looking down and more than likely accidentally or purposely spitting all over Overhaul's germophobic face, glorious. And that was when people started kind of paying attention. In addition to that, when Shigaraki put on the hoodie, it's like, oh snap, like he's got. Also, I kind of accidentally skipped the encounter in the mall, but we talked about the benefit of him interacting with Stain, so like all Izuku did was like further solidify that for him. Plus, because of the whole I've already done a video on him and Deku thing, I kind of was trying to not do the same thing. Anyway, Shigaraki, being who he is at this point, though, is now starting to gather his leadership abilities, getting better at teamwork, all these little things. As far as planning goes, Overhaul was right. He needed a plan. Stain was right. He needed conviction. He needed an idea of where he was taking the league. Then he needed to not only focus on that idea, besides just killing All Might with the deconstruction of Hero Society, but then he also needed to figure out what were the means in which he wished to achieve this goal. That was what was lacking, and that is what he started to find. When he starts taking the bullets from Overhaul, we now see like a chemical weapon, a unique to him weapon, besides just the quirks, besides just his forces and their unique abilities. He's got the unique military power and like a product that people want, which is a way to get more financing. Then he's got, but also it's a product that requires a lot of research, so it requires investment. And that's where you get to, when we get past the Overhaul arc, because Shigaraki is there at the beginning. He's there to, we get the cutaway of him telling Toga and Twice to make sure they atone, and then we get him fucking running them pockets because Overhaul failed the vibe check. Then we don't see Shigaraki again. We don't see him during remedial course arc, of course. We don't see him during the Culture Festival. We don't see him during Pro Hero. We don't see him during joint training. Instead, what we do is we take Shigaraki and we put him in a little box. We jump 60 chapters into the future to chapter 220, My Villain Academia. This is where the Shigaraki stands were truly born. This is where they came out in full force. And more than anything, this is where we finally get to understand more and more about who Shigaraki is. And the fact that while we do call Izuku the Madman, Shigaraki does have that same zeal, that same nutty professor, that same vibe of intensity where he's trying his best to become the next symbol of villainy. And this becomes highlighted. And when you see that when posed with the task of taming Makia, instead of him balking and being like, dude, that's going to be tough, anything even close to that, for 6 weeks straight, this man had multiple 48-hour, 44-minute rounds dealing with Gato Makia, trying to kill him, and then going to sleep for about 3 hours just to do the 48-hour and 44-minute dance again. Now, the things that he gets out of this are obviously further working on his teamwork and coordination with the League of Villains, but also a lot of power scaling stuff. And the important thing here, though, in that regard, with that interaction, is that Shigaraki was trying to use brawn, similar to how Deku replicates All Might, and that All For One just used power and got what he wanted. And Shigaraki here, while mentally handicapped, could not just use power. In addition to that, though, Shigaraki was forced to rely on something besides his quirk. The issue with fighting Makia is that if he even managed to touch Makia with his quirk previously, it should have, in theory, killed him or started to cause him to decay and cause serious damage. So Shigaraki more than likely was not trying to use decay to beat Giganta Makia that entire time. So he was kind of having a reverse training, whereas Izuku trained his physicality to get a better quirk or get a quirk. Shigaraki spent a lot of time training his physicality because he could not use his quirk. But leading into what gets all that rolling is when we finally get the doctor's perspective on Shigaraki of a 20-year-old kid who's just palling around with the dregs of society, which is exactly what everyone has been saying about Shigaraki for 200 plus chapters. They were like, yo, Shigaraki, he's got the hands, he's got the spooky boy aesthetic. He yelled, yeah, like he was cool when he popped off on Overhaul, but he hasn't really done a lot, you know, he doesn't have that sauce, that villain juice. And so to have that within the context of the narrative finally directly stated, let all of us know also, not only is, you know, society aware that he's kind of petulant, not only are we the fandom aware that he is petulant and very childish, but Horikoshi himself is aware that he is kind of childish and unfinished, and that was the point. So, what do we get going forward though? We get the introduction of the Meta Liberation Army, what their ideologies are, who were hinted at during the Culture Festival with Gentle. And you see as we get further along, they challenged the League of Villains because the League of Villains represent a similar ideology but completely different execution. Redestro took the time to do the opposite of what his dad did. His dad was like, I'm gonna start a war, gather my troops, pull up, do my damage, woo woo woo. That got his dad in a jail cell and killed. Redestro decided that he would try to do it in a completely different way, completely infiltrate, completely restructure society within the systems that were available. But he, while stockpiled for war, definitely didn't seem to have the actual intent of going to it. Now, that's where Shigaraki comes in. Because Shigaraki is a man defined by his quirk, as any man is. But unlike most people who are defined by their quirk, Shigaraki becomes effectively a man versus nature, like a natural force element. When you read stories about how, or there's like these people who are like, well, this person isn't necessarily a character, they're more supposed to be like an idea, where people will say that Luffy's not supposed to be a character or a person, but he's supposed to be the idea of freedom. In this way, Shigaraki has become the embodiment of destruction and chaos, and he does work as that force of foil, that foil force, that just rush of destruction and chaos and problems. In addition to that, gifted a strong quirk from birth, whereas our main character worked for it. There's a lot of juxtaposition and like the opposites and all these other things that really come into play where you can go this or that or start looking at these parallels and perpendiculars. It's a perpendicular because they're directly different circumstances. They're not parallels because that would be the same. Anyway, most of my viewers have passed geometry, right? Anyway, so what Shigaraki is effectively, though, is that he gets to function as a symbol of destruction, the symbol of terror that all will fear, etc. But he also gets to function as a character because we see during this arc that he goes, yeah, I embody destruction. He embraces that his quirk basically makes him allergic to things that annoy him. And as such, he has to kill anything he doesn't like. It's literally written into how his body is meant to process the world and interactions in the same way that Toga is designed by birth to naturally consume blood and try to become other people as she is obsessed with them. And that's the nature of her quirk. Quirks inform personalities. So a man who destroys everything in his hands that he holds is going to be wired towards destructive purposes. This is why I think it's important to note that whether or not All For One was secretly the neighbor, the most All For One could have done is given him the quirk, which, due to the nature of the fact that Aries' hair is currently blue with the red eyes, and Shigaraki's hair throughout a good chunk of this is also blue. You can look right there. Boom. There's Shigaraki's hair being... Well, actually, it looks kind of white when you look at it on a camera. But yeah, it's blue. So the point is that Shigaraki, with everything going on, when we find out when he was a kid that his quirk was making him first off, the fact that he was consistently having that allergic reaction before, I believe we saw, like that was an ongoing thing. The quirk was starting to manifest. I believe it just manifested later because of the nature of how it works and the fact that ultimately he wasn't necessarily grabbing things, and I think he kind of needed an emotional push to really get the quirk going. Now, looking at what happens with Shigaraki's family, the way he's abused, smacked around, and what his dad told him, the thing is that his dad's words have never left Shigaraki. Though consciously or subconsciously all that stuff was repressed, it's important to note that according to Shigaraki's father, according to him, heroes are people who hurt their families for the betterment of society. And in the course of Shigaraki's life, after training with All For One, after spending all this time with the League of Villains, he's become a person who will hurt all of society for his family. Did you catch that? Shigaraki was told that heroes were people who hurt their families for the sake of others, and is now, even through all the quote-unquote brainwashing All For One has given him, maintained a stance that is directly derivative of his childhood traumas and abuse. It's brilliant. I mean, honestly, Hori's the madman. And that isn't to say that All For One doesn't influence him, but this is to say that with a quirk that wired him to be a living beacon and force of destruction, and with the background of being told that, heroes are bad, you shouldn't want to be this, this is the destructive nature of what heroes bring to the table, and then you have to realize that when Shigaraki accidentally killed his family, he says it might have been on purpose. I think he's kind of just accepted and internalized all the guilt and the self-shaming at this point, where, I mean, obviously he could just be a complete wackadoodle and have decided that, yeah, you know what, that wasn't a mistake or an accident, because it's normal to kind of want to kill your abuser. That feeling is pretty normal. So him saying that killing his father wasn't an accident, especially when we see the way it plays out where his dad smacks him in the face with the gardening tools and then he just goes to kill him. That part completely checks out. Him saying that it wasn't an accident when he killed his family, though, the rest of the family, I've never really gone with. I think that he was panicked, confused, and had no control over the power, and it was a damn strong quirk. But it's easier to tell yourself that if I was willing to kill my father on purpose, then these other people probably were killed deliberately too, and I'm just trying to make myself feel better about it, or try to make myself feel like less of a monster. Because you gotta remember, they preserved the hands and gave them to Shigaraki, but Shigaraki at 5 literally said, I want to go kill these guys because they picked on me. So when I look at what All For One said with the umbrella scene, when he's holding the umbrella for Ujiko and he goes, that boy was born with a twisted nature, I don't disagree with that. I think the thing that All For One loves the most about Tomura is that he was always going to be bad. The satisfaction in knowing that, yes, he molded him. Yes, he shaped him. Yes, he made sure that he got to meet All Might and hate him and wanted to kill him. But at the end of the day, these are all steps that Shigaraki might have ended up taking anyway, and more than likely would have, just because most people with quirks that wire them to be, harmful tend to actually end up being harmful. Like Toga's quirk naturally makes her drink the blood, so of course she ended up having a bloodletting incident, killed a kid in class, and was responsible for multiple murders. She is known as a serial killer. There was a series of bloodletting murders, as in she bled people out slowly to death. You could argue that Twice's was just a case of his life going complete to shit, and like that's a completely separate issue. You have but what I think is a beautiful example is when they were like, oh, some kids are born with powers, and the filler episode, and you see the kid with the gun fingers, and then instantly, boom, you cut away to the fact that he was like the USJ villain. And so some of these people have quirks, and they instantly just kind of like lock into this dangerous, and like their biology just kind of like puts them on this like more hazardous path, which is why I think that one, quirks, not just Shigaraki, are being billed as like the final villain. And the only way I don't see Shigaraki dying is if he specifically gets his quirk removed at the end of the series by Deku. And even then, he's probably going to prison, and I don't know if getting your quirk removed removes the negative psychological wirings that you would acquire due to having your biology wired that specific way. So that's all stuff to keep in mind, that Shigaraki from the age of 5 is more than likely wired to just be this villain, this bitch, this nigga, this, like, and when I say this bitch, I mean like that bitch kind of this bitch. You know what I mean. So Shigaraki's out here finally confronting the fact that, Redestro, he's, fighting Redestro, being accused of being like nothing but a harbinger of destruction, unworthy of causes. And he says, yeah, you're right. I just want to destroy all the stuff that I hate. And that's me and living my quirk life. And Redestro was like, damn, son, you're right. You're literally embodying your quirk. And that's the thing, is that in the same way that Luffy somehow symbolizes freedom, or like manages to symbolize freedom to a certain degree, I think that the Monkey D family symbolizes freedom in One Piece, but that's a separate topic. But Shigaraki manages to embody chaos, destruction, freedom, anarchy, just like all these, like liberation, all these things, to the extent where Horikoshi made it a point to draw him in like the flowing robe, the white hair with the negative space, the skyline as Redestro bowed, truly painting him as like a savior character for the downtrodden, the people who are filled with quirks that aren't compatible with society, these people who just want quirk liberation. Like, this guy is the personification of everything they have ever hoped for and dreamed of. And boom, Lil Shiggy is here to be exactly that. And so we see him come from a villain who is literally more or less playing a video game as far as he's concerned, with his tackle and his angle towards being a villain, and the approach that he's taking, even when his relationships, actually, like this, everything is just like this long game, and it's like, oh, boss levels, and then you get to the training where he's like, all right, we know that no matter what happens, we're going to have to fight either the Metal Liberation Army, we know that, or heroes. We know that they have Giron, who's our broker, but there's a lot of information stored. We know that they claim to have like 100,000 forces, and you see he assesses as they're going through, he's assessing the city, looking at the location, the roads, all these different little things that let us know that Shigaraki, while yes, in the beginning, our perception of him would have been that he was a petulant child, just like kind of throwing a tantrum, trying to, be whatever his master told him to be. He is currently, to an extent, where he is an established villain with his own agency, who's gathered his own followers through his own power. It's important to note that Gigantomachia did not just kneel to him. He kneeled to him specifically because he did what All For One had been doing for centuries, which was showing up, being the strongest dude on the block with the biggest dick, and just making people bow. So Gigantomachia saw him do that and was like, yo, successor, all right, we out here doming people. Tops for the win. And so we get to see this is the progress that Shigaraki has made, but then in addition to that, it's compounded even further when we start talking about how the doctor says, yo, I'll give you surgery to help you be able to take anything. Everything will be in your grasp, even one for all. We still don't know exactly what that means, but what that does imply or basically directly state is that we have another power buff coming for Shigaraki, and the reasoning behind the buff on Shigaraki's part is most important. I am done not taking heroes seriously. For where Shigaraki is in the current story, his goal is to make sure that he can achieve his, take out his opponents, destroy the heroes that are at the top, reestablish the sociological workings of the country due to the fact that by making a quirk society, which he is perfectly fine with, because who's going to stand in the way of the dude who touches the ground and wipes out a city? So the reality is that Shigaraki has poised himself by destroying the Liberation Army's leaders' resolve to be the leader, by capturing by essentially being a dragon that swallows every person who he encounters, their ambitions, their goals, their ideals, makes them his own and elevates himself even further. He's like the shonen protagonist of villains, where all he wants to do is like low-key steal everybody's thunder and like steal their shine and eventually overtake everyone else. It's like he's trying to pull the Goku effect, but on My Hero Academia villains. It's kind of baffling, but also exhilarating to watch a villain kind of make the ascent, because unlike a lot of those where it's just like, well, yeah, like over time, like no, like Shigaraki is like we're watching him like build up to be this villain. This isn't a case of shonen escalation problem. This is a villain who is structured around the idea of growth, specifically tangential to the protagonist, to make sure that no matter where the story like goes in the future, we have a shot at not only it actually being a reasonable, well done arc for the like final wars or whatever and the upcoming war, but there's no reason for Horikoshi to necessarily flub it. And I think that with where Tomura Shigaraki is as a character right now, from the actually getting his intelligence in play, to taking things seriously, to consistently making it a point to try to strategize for the opponent, to making sure not to waste resources anymore. Because yes, he like when we think about the way he handled Muscular, where he sent Muscular, like let Muscular go in first, even though he wasn't going to be that well controlled. Moonfish, these like and Mustard, all three of these have different reasons for being considered high volatility cases, right? Mustard is a kid, and yes, Toga is 17, so she's technically a kid too. But like Mustard was like a middle school, first year of high school type kid, not a I've been on the run for a year and a half type kid. Literally pulled up wearing a school uniform. Come on. Muscular was just a nutta case. Moonfish, nut case. Gagato Makia, not a nut case, but also couldn't be woken up at the time. But think about this. They had a heavy hitter. They could have tried to go into hiding. They could have been like, all right, warp us here, warp us there. We'll try to be there soon, drop all their phones. They could have done anything after like they got warped. What they chose to do instead was to actually go ahead, make it a point to take out the enemies in advance and surprise them with Gigantomachia, who they knew would come after him later. This is all Shigaraki's idea, down to him taking off twice his mask. He's currently a person who is in touch with the feelings and ideals of his friends. He actually cares about them, has made it to the top as far as, so to speak, become villain Hokage, and overall is in a prime position to kill All Might within the next 2 years, our time, I'm expecting. We might get All Might dead by the end of 2021 or by the end of 2020, and I'm here for it. If you guys enjoyed what I've had to say, this is, I think, my official longest video to date now, with it being a 40-minute video effectively on Tomura Shigaraki. If you enjoyed anything I had to say, make sure you like, subscribe, and share. Make sure you promo this if this is like the kind of content you want to see. I know it's been a long time coming. Here it is. Sorry I made you wait, especially you, Squid, who probably will sit through and watch this part of the video. So I'm going to give that special shout out to you here at the end, because you've made it a point to message me a couple times about this video. So Overall, let me know what you guys think. If this is a good overview of how Shigaraki has like progressed from the beginning to or maybe you like Shigaraki from the beginning. Maybe you still don't like Shigaraki. Regardless, let me know in the comments below. This has been a 40-minute video, and Anaki is out.